Hey everyone, I'm here with Andy, the new CEO of Empire Flippers. Andy, super happy to have you on.
Nicholas, yeah, same. Great to be here. Thanks so much.
It's basically my second rodeo with Empire Flippers because I had Justin on, I think, a bit more than a year ago. So I'm super intrigued and interested. But I mean, for those that don't know Empire Flippers and that don't know you, like, feel free to give a quick intro.
Yeah, of course, no worries. Yeah, so Empire Flippers, we're a vetted marketplace for buying and selling online businesses. We do all different kind of businesses and monetizations. We do a lot of e-commerce, kind of content sites, service, and some SaaS businesses as well.
Awesome. And I mean, feel free to also tell us a bit about your background.
Yeah, so I'm in the UK at the moment, where I was originally born. I've been at Empire Flippers since about actually it was 8 years 2 days ago. So it was April 2017. Prior to that, my kind of background is sales and sales management roles. And then when I joined Empire Flippers, I moved out to Vietnam. We were a pretty small team, all kind of based in Southeast Asia at that time. I've kind of grown with the company since then.
Yeah. How big is Empire Flippers right now in terms of either headcount or revenue, whatever you can share publicly?
Yeah, so we're about 50 people now.
Got it. I mean, before we dig into all things M&A, I would love to double click on your journey. Um, I mean, tell us a bit of like how you joined 8 years ago and now you're the CEO. So like, how did that go, and did you expect to end up there?
Yeah, okay. I'll try and give the brief overview, and then very
Yeah.
happy to kind of dig into anything which you'd like. So I joined 2017. I guess Empire Flippers in its current form had been running for a couple of years at that point. Justin probably talked about like the background of the company being that they were building their own small content sites and selling them, and then that kind of grew into selling other people's sites as well. And basically, they had done some marketing hires initially to generate a load of demand, some sales hires, then to close it. And then I came on as one of three of the first kind of operational hires in the business, to kind of like, service the business basically. That was 2017. And for the majority of my kind of time in the company up until a couple of years ago, I was kind of running the operations team, director of operations. So that's basically our vetting team, because we vet every business that goes on the
Mm,
marketplace. Our
yeah,
migration team, because we transfer the assets as well, and then customer service in the mix there too. And then, I guess probably helpful just to give you the 20 seconds on the industry over that time as well,
for
because
sure.
they're kind of linked. When I joined, for sure, the business was growing, and the industry, the space as a whole was growing. And that continued for a few years. And then 2020 is when things just went like completely insane for us and for the industry in general. A few different things going on there. Obviously, like interest rates were basically zero for a long time, which is good for M&A activity. COVID, while it was kind of bad for the economy at large, was like generally quite good for online businesses because everyone was at home buying stuff online and stuff like that. And then kind of more niche to what we do, but there was a lot of money that was raised to buy specifically Amazon FBA businesses. There were these big aggregators, and we were kind of perfectly positioned for that. So our 2020, 2021, and 2022 were like completely insane. And then at the end of that, 2023 was a particularly tough year. All of those things which were tailwinds from the economy, all of a sudden kind of like were working against us: interest rates, inflation, stuff like that. At that point, we had a pretty large team, and we were having a pretty tough year in 2023. And through that period as well, so we have Justin and Joe as our other co-founder. They had kind of deliberately stepped back from the business a little bit and put a management team in place, as kind of like part of the growth plan. But it was kind of clear that someone needed to take a very hands-on approach to kind of managing the business, getting things a little bit more back on track. And I kind of put my hand up at that point, and obviously I built a bunch of trust and good work for Joe and Justin over the years. And initially, I tried to make it as easy for them as possible, so we did it under the kind of chief of staff title, which, to be frank,
Mm,
was a title that I hated, but it meant that like if they got buyer's remorse, they could undo it easily. And then, yeah, I think like middle of last year was about a year into that, and that's when we
Yeah.
kind of formalized things up with the CEO title. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's the cliff notes. But very happy to dig into anything.
Got it. I mean, first off, makes a ton of sense that you are like, I think it's super smart move on your end to be happy with the chief of staff title, even though for a lot of companies it's like kind of like the glorified assistant.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So I think that shows that you really don't have a lot of ego, which I think is like a massively good thing. What I would be super curious about, like, I mean, you were in a leadership position before, you knew the company in and out. What was different after you stepped up to CEO that like you didn't expect, or was it just like exactly what you thought how it would be?
I think like a lot of the business stuff was obviously as I thought it would be, because when I wanted the role, I kind of went to Joe and Justin with a plan, so I thought I knew kind of what the problems were. I think the thing which I maybe underestimated a little bit is like the emotional stress of being that kind of person that it all kind of relies on you. I joke with Joe and Justin that it was kind of much easier to pick holes in all the things they were doing wrong than to actually be the person myself. So, and like I say that as someone, like I consider myself pretty rational and emotionally stable, but like it can be a lot at times. So yeah, that's probably the main thing that surprised me a little bit.
That's so funny. Yeah, it's different if the buck really stops with you.
That's right.
Awesome. I mean, let's switch gears and talk M&A here. Maybe asked as like a SaaS founder, I would love to cover two perspectives. A, like the SaaS buying perspective, and then we could also like talk SaaS, but also talk general online business, and then from like the seller's perspective. What do I even need to have as like a foundation if I want to acquire? So let's say I run a small company, I have like 250K in the bank. Would that be enough to acquire a small business, or is that like you need millions in capital to even get into the M&A game? So like, where does it start, and like how would you evaluate the current market, and like what are like the pitfalls for someone who didn't do it before?
Yeah, for sure. So, I mean, yeah, in terms of our marketplace, I mean, we have listings from, anything around kind of like the 100K list price, maybe even slightly lower, up to kind of mid seven, sometimes 8-figure listings. And obviously typically the buyer for each of those categories is a little bit different. But we have everything from, kind of like high net worth individuals or people that want to use some of their savings to maybe like not have their 9 to 5 anymore or something like
Yeah.
that, right up to kind of more professional institutional money, people who are kind of doing this week in, week out for a career. So yeah, I mean, there kind of is there's a starting point for anyone, kind of regardless of budget to a certain extent. And I think the thing is that where we see people do the best with when they buy these businesses is when they understand that like they're buying something which is or requires a skill set and is going to need to be run day to day. We try not to. Some of these businesses are fairly passive, but maybe for the seller who's been running it for multiple years and has systems set up and stuff like that. So I think like the buyers who do the best with it kind of go in eyes wide open that either they already have the skill set or there's like a learning curve for them to learn
Yeah.
that skill set. But that like, that kind of 200K price point, I mean, I know one example right now actually where, somebody bought a business off of us for less than 200K actually. I think it was about 190K, and is looking to relist that for somewhere in like the 1.5 million range. I forget exactly when they bought it, but like within the last few
Yeah.
years. So you get
That's
some pretty
massive.
awesome stories from people with
Yeah.
that level of money.
And what's the whole cash versus loan situation currently? Because I mean, the interest rates I think here in Europe are a bit lower than the US, but still, like, I mean, we're out of the zero interest rate time. So do people typically use like a ton of debt, or like what's a typical structure, and like what kind of like also what would be your advice to people looking at Empire Flipper to potentially like acquire an asset?
Yeah. So, a lot of the deals are kind of either all cash or mostly cash. And again, it's a little size dependent. So like particularly on the lower end of our marketplace, a lot of those deals tend to be very heavily cash based. And then you also, some deals, particularly as you get larger, will typically might have a portion of seller financing as well. So not necessarily
Yeah.
debt financing, but like the seller takes the note over a 12-month period or something like that. Sometimes with some performance expectations in there, and there can be some upside for the seller. There can be a kind of a lot of different permutations of that. We do still see the main kind of debt financing we see typically is SBA. So it is normally US buyers and US businesses as well. We even though interest rates are higher, we actually, if anything, are kind of seeing more success with SBA loans in the space now than we were kind of a few years ago. But lenders seem
Interesting.
to be, for the right business at least,
Yeah.
generally more amenable to those loans for online businesses.
Interesting. And I mean, maybe let's switch sides here on the marketplace. Like, if I have a SaaS that, or like an online business that does like, I don't know, let's say like 25 to 50K a month,
Mhm.
like, how do I even figure out what multiple to list on? Because I mean, you hear wild stories on Twitter, like, yeah, I sold my thing for like 15x revenue and
Yeah.
whatever. But I was like, it's super hard to get a pointer on reality. And also, if you talk to people who sold, they still sold at a different time, like 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, and it's like always changing. So how do I, as someone who's selling, like, how do I even know what to sell for and like what to ask?
Well, you could go to empireflippers.com and use our valuation tool. That would be a good starting point.
That's a
But
good
kind of,
pointer.
yeah. But to talk generally about valuations, I mean, yes, across the board, valuations today are a bit lower than, say, like 2021, 22, when interest rates were low, etc. They're still roughly comparable with prior to the kind of COVID period. It's
Hmm.
kind of difficult always to compare the data because, during that 2021, 2022 period, there are also so many of these businesses, SaaS and e-commerce, that were just crushing so hard. And now kind of like the average performance of those businesses is probably a little bit lower as well. So there's a lot of
Yeah.
different things that go into it. I think like specific to SaaS founders and SaaS sellers, our valuation tool, it does have some logic in it that will kind of split between businesses that maybe should be valued on revenue versus on profit, seller defined earnings. Typically, particularly in the kind of list price range that we sell, 99 times out of 100, we believe that like the correct valuation is still going to be a multiple of profit. And we don't really, we don't really get involved in the, like you say, X times revenue for unprofitable
Yeah.
businesses.
Yeah.
There obviously is a market for that, but it's just a little outside of what we do.
Got it. So not a lot of like venture orphans on Empire Flippers typically, I'd guess.
No, not really.
Yeah. I mean, maybe let's talk a bit like your growth strategy at Empire Flippers, because you mentioned that you came to Justin with a plan. How do you approach growing the brand, because it's such a legacy brand in the space? I mean, there are obviously competitors that like spun up like recently in quote like a couple years ago. Um, but like, how do you manage them? Because I think especially if you have a lot of legacy, it's an advantage regarding brand, but I would assume that there's also a bit of drag from it.
Yeah, good question. And it's something I think about a bunch as well because, I took over this role and Empire Flippers, particularly in the early days, but was very much an extension of Joe and Justin, kind of like the company's brand was kind of their personal brand as well. And so, I think a lot about how to kind of protect that and all of the good stuff in that, but also, like you say, make sure we're kind of moving forward in an industry that is like professionalizing really quickly as well. I think like where I think we sit is if you look at the market broadly, on the one end, you have the kind of the true, more automated marketplace DIY type companies. And then you have a huge section of the market, which is still kind of like much more old school, one-to-one brokers, high touch,
Yeah.
but maybe slightly less consistent service. And we try and sit kind of in the middle of that. And like
Interesting.
sometimes the middle is a dangerous place to be, but on this particular thing, I actually think it's the right place to be. So like we have market leading tech, we have a big engineering team. Our platform is as good as it gets, but we also have a team of 50 people and our process is like very, very people driven. A good example of that maybe at the moment is how we're thinking about using AI in the business. So obviously, like every company on our management meetings, whatever the question is, the answer seems to be AI at the moment. But we're trying to really deliberately use it to free up our people's time to like get on the phone and help customers. So, an example, like in our vetting process, we have a super thorough vetting process, typically takes a few weeks. But we might have a guy who's like spending some portion of his week checking a number on a screenshot and making sure it matches a number in a P&L. That's like a perfect use case for something
Yeah.
that we could have AI do. And that person who's probably vetted thousands of businesses could be on the phone with a seller, like helping them prep their business. That's kind of like
Yeah.
how we're thinking about it.
And do you have like a engineer that you just like grabbed out of the tech team and put dedicated on the AI stuff, or like how do you execute on that? Because I know on a lot of marketing teams I talk to, they are now hiring like GTM engineers, which is kind of like, I mean, even in the past, marketing teams usually had engineers, and now it's just all of the sudden just like called GTM AI engineer. Like
Right.
how do you manage the implementation of that?
Yeah. So we have an ops director who is pretty well versed in AI. And so he spearheads some of this stuff, and then in conjunction with our current engineering team, basically we just everything. The vast majority of our engineering sprint seem to be on AI focused features
Yeah.
at the moment.
Yeah, got it. I mean, makes sense because you of course have like the front end that we all can see if we go to empireflippers.com, which of course is engineering effort as well. Also like the calculator, as you mentioned. But then what's the split of time you spend on like user focused or like website visitor focused tech versus internal?
That's a good question. I think I don't know what the split would be, but we have consciously over the last year or so tried to up the amount of kind of like customer focused engineering time that we spend, because it's very, you see sometimes with like the internal features that somebody has something they want at exactly that time.
Yeah.
And we put a bunch of engineering time on it, and then like something changes in the process, and a few months later that thing's now defunct. So we try and have a slightly more rigorous analysis process before we kind of spend too much engineering time on the internal stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a mix.
Yeah, makes sense. And then, I mean, how do you, is SEO a big thing? Like, how do you even get people on your site? Like, because I mean, marketplaces are like notoriously hard. So how do you manage to acquire both user groups?
Yeah, I mean, we obviously have the benefit of like years and years of content marketing that our team has done. So yeah, SEO has been a huge part of our traffic acquisition strategy for a long time. We actually now see plenty of traffic coming from the new search engines like ChatGPT as well, which is interesting. So a lot of a lot of kind of like word of mouth. We have a referral program which performs pretty well for us. We don't go super wide with it, but typically like past buyers and sellers can be really great referees for us. And that's probably the main ones.
Yeah. And I would assume if it's like with you, like a decade-old brand, there's where word of mouth can become massive because you compound it over so many years.
Yeah, exactly right. Hopefully we've been doing a decent job of selling people's businesses for, like you say, the best part of a decade now.
Yeah.
And so word gets around.
Are you super nitty-gritty in terms of attribution, or are you more in the camp of like believing in brand and you don't need to measure every click? Like where do you fall as a marketing mind?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think attribution is a word that keeps Greg, our marketing director, up at night. I think we try to be as nitty gritty as possible. I mean, it's difficult. There's some element of someone sees us on a podcast or meets us at a conference, and then maybe they come through a different channel. So, but we do try to attribute it as like precisely as we can. Yeah.
Yeah. But the focus is fully on online business, or did you ever consider like venturing into offline? Because I know I talked to a buddy of mine, like I think 3 weeks ago, and he's starting to buy tax advisory firms. super random. But like that's the stuff that as like a tech guy, you just sometimes forget like that the real world is also like massive in terms of business.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for now, our focus is like very much on online businesses. I think our version of that that comes up that kind of prompts us to have that conversation sometimes is that we'll regularly come across e-commerce businesses where there's like one or two retail locations as well. And those were like, that only feels like kind of a small step from where we
Yeah,
are right
yeah,
now.
yeah,
But as of yet, we're kind of, yeah, we kind of say no to those and we just stick to the online stuff.
yeah. Awesome. I mean, we're coming close to time, so I would love to get around to where we roughly started the conversation on the CEO topic. What were your 2 or 3 biggest learnings as a CEO? Something you would love to know, even when you started as the chief of staff.
I think, one of them is just when you get up to a company of, like I say, we're about 50 people now. And previously we were kind of a bit more than that as well. And I think one of the things which I intuitively did know, but I've like really learned is that like communication with a group that size is just everything. So now I
Hmm.
try hard to like over communicate as much as possible. And so we're like obviously a completely remote team. And we're all around the world. So I do async stuff like weekly Loom updates and stuff like that. But I think that's one is just like if you're in doubt whether or not you've communicated something enough, you probably haven't. So just do it again anyway. Um, and I don't know what's another one. One of the things I did when I took over as CEO, which I think I got right, is as I built my management team, I kind of put the people in it who had been really close and worked really well for me in my previous role. And I think that has worked out really well. I think one of the things which helps us as a business internally is on our management calls, anyone can call anyone out. I'm very happy for people to shoot my ideas down and tell me I'm an idiot, and we kind of have that kind of openness. And so we just try not to waste time, and that kind of enables us to make quick decisions. So yeah, I think they're probably the two things that either I learned or I'm just like, oh, that's actually one thing I got right.
Love it. And then before we wrap up, anything specific you want to shout out?
I mean, I would just say, obviously, check out empireflippers.com. I'm also pretty active on LinkedIn, as you saw, talking about things like the deal and rippling fiasco at the moment, which is hilarious. So yeah, I mean, feel free to add me on LinkedIn. I'm pretty active and responsive there.
Amazing. And we will, of course, link your LinkedIn below. Andy, thanks a ton for coming on.
Perfect. Enjoyed it. Thanks a lot, Nicholas.